June 4th, 1942. Pacific Ocean. Northeast of Midway Atoll, the sea is a sheet of glass and iron, flat under a hard sun that turns canvas and steel the color of a kiln. On the forward deck of the fleet carrier, Akagi, Lieutenant Commander Takashi, a maintenance officer assigned to the carrier's aviation group, feels the heat through the soles of his boots. The smell that morning is a familiar one, hot avgas, oiled canvas, and the metallic tang of freshly cut brass. The catwalks hum with voices. But there is an easy rhythm to it, a confidence that has been beaten into the men by months at sea and years of advancing doctrine. Aircraft are tools, not threats. Air crews are masters of the sky, not pawns of fate. From the island of flight deck, where the sun slices the horizon like a blade, petty officers lash canvas and check bolts. A row of Mitsubishi A6M Zeros basks in the sun like mangled insects on a green leaf. Sleek, obedient, their polished cowlings reflecting 1,000 suns. Ensigns call serial numbers and engine temps. The engine rooms below answer with a steady thrum you can feel in your teeth. On the bridge, Vice Admiral Chuichi. Nagumo watches with the calm reserve of a man who trusts procedure. His face is a map of previous campaigns and the decisions that carry men into battle. He stands between the polished brass of the binnacle and the endless blue. A small figure framed by vastness and certainty. On the neighboring carrier, Soryu, Chief Petty Officer Hideo jokes with a young pilot. Lieutenant Sato about their morning meal. Sato's hands are steady as he runs a pre-flight, smoothing the fabric of the control surfaces, tasting metal and salt air on his lips. The crews have routines. The decks are an orchestra, and each man knows his part. A shout goes up, catapults loaded, throttles set, and the deck gives birth to flight in a hush of steam and thunder. You can feel the solid weight of confidence in the way ropes are coiled, in the way an aircraft mechanic wipes oil from his hands and smiles. We have the sea, someone says. We have the sky. It is said as if that sentence is an incantation. The intelligence reports have been enough to reassure them. Reconnaissance finds nothing but empty ocean. Radio silence has been observed. Plans are in motion. The carrier's air groups have been trimmed into a lean machine. Fighters for air superiority, bombers for range and strike, torpedo planes for the kill. The doctrine is simple, as it always is before the universe shows you a flaw. Protect the fleet with fighters. Strike at the enemy's heart with coordinated waves. Keep ships and planes moving like a single living thing. On the hangar decks, mechanics spool propellers and check radios. The whispers down there are practical. Carburetor adjustments, magneto checks, and the eternal worry over spare parts. Yet even worry is braided with pride. These planes belong to men who practice their landings on the carrier deck until their muscles remember the deck's every splinter. A flight leader pins on his wing stripes in the mirror of a locker door and traces the black lacquer of a previous campaign painted on the fuselage. His voice is low when he steps into the sunlight, but it holds the same certainty as the others. We will find them, he says, not as a question. There's a peculiar sound to the morning, the piston engines warming, the occasional rattle of loose harnesses, the slap of canvas against wood. Seagulls, indifferent witnesses, wheel and cry, and a thin breeze carries the taste of salt and something else, almost sweet, like the varnish on a new instrument. The decks move with men who believe in their tools. They have fought aircraft before. They have dispatched enemy planes with coordinated gunnery and agile Zeros. To many of these sailors, the idea of aircraft as decisive killers of ships is an abstract worry, solvable by training and seamanship. Down in the plotting room, a map of the ocean is spread across a table. Charts and orders are annotated in precise black ink. Signal flags billow in the sunlight like punctuation. Ensigns and lieutenants confer over bearings and fuel consumption rates, making the cold calculations of war. The plan for the day is methodical. Reconnaissance at dawn, air patrols to protect the fleet, and a strike force at the ready. On deck, lines are cast off for a strike flight, a formation of Nakajima. B-5N Kate torpedo bombers and D-3A Val dive bombers, the latter a plane built for surgical strikes. The men strap into their cockpits with familiar motions, checking instruments, swallowing the clatter of their own thoughts beneath the roar of life. They are professionals. They are not naive. But there is a line between respect for an adversary and a kind of institutional hubris. In the mess, a senior pilot laughs about the Americans' obsolete dive tactics. We have the best fighter pilots, he insists, tapping the brim of his cap. Their carriers? Out of position. Their air groups? Weak, we are the ones at sea. We will meet them on our terms. Below decks, however, there are small, almost invisible notes of unease. A radio operator erases a line of code and glances at the horizon. A mechanic tightens a bolt and lingers for a second too long, as if the tool in his hand were a compass needle that might tremble. But these moments are private, swallowed in the greater faith that the carriers have brought to these men. That the fleet is a cathedral of steel and leather, that aircraft are instruments in the hands of their pilots, not the instruments of an indifferent fate. Up on the flight deck, the launch sequence begins. The carrier creaks as steam builds in the catapult housings, and engines answer with an eager roar. Pilots adjust oxygen straps and peer over the nose into an ocean that seems to hold its breath. Today will be another day of practice. A reconnaissance and patrol, perhaps a skirmish, perhaps nothing. The men do what they always have: prepare, check, and send their best upwards. They do not yet know that out over that glassy blue, hidden by sun and the curvature of the world, a small, squat American plane with a slow, deliberate silhouette is beginning to climb. It is not fast, it does not dance like a zero, and to these men the Dauntless would have looked unthreatening on sight. But the world that morning is about to teach them a lesson in geometry and gravity they did not expect. June 4th, 1942, mid-morning, 20,000 feet above the Pacific. The first warning is not a sound, it is a shadow. A thin, wavering shape ripples across the flight deck of Kaga, sliding over men and machinery like a stain. Petty Officer Morita looks up instinctively, raising a hand to block the sun. For a heartbeat, he sees nothing but glare. Then, emerging from that blinding white, he spots a speck, then another, then a cluster. They fall into alignment like beads on a wire. Someone shouts. Not a word, but a raw sound pulled from the gut. On the bridge of Akagi, a junior officer slams binoculars to his eyes. Teki Kogeki, aircraft attack. His voice is too loud, too desperate to fit the calm doctrine drilled into him. But what he sees above the carrier group is something no manual prepared him for. American SBD Dauntless dive bombers, dozens of them, rolling into attack position with mechanical, almost ritual precision. Far above, the Dauntlesses hang in formation like a constellation given purpose. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey leads the charge, his aircraft trembling in the thin air as he banks hard to the right. His rear gunner, Radio Man First Class Frank Toms, is already scanning the blue beneath them, calling out altitudes and angles. The wind lashes the cockpit. The smell of oil and hot steel fills the air. You, standing in the Dauntless with them, would feel the aircraft vibrate as gravity pulls at the wings. McCluskey tilts forward and sees the carriers below. 3 Japanese flat tops arranged in a perfect, terrible geometry of opportunity. He presses the talk button. All right, boys, this is it. Then the dive brakes bloom. Bright red perforated flaps snap open on each wing, the unmistakable mark of the Dauntless. The air screams across them, slowing the plane just enough to make the upcoming plunge survivable. And to the men on the Japanese carriers, staring upward in disbelief, those red-spotted wings become a vision of doom. The Dauntlesses tip over simultaneously, and the sky falls. From the deck of Soryu, it feels as though the heavens are tearing open. Mechanics sprint for cover between tied-down aircraft. Officers scream orders lost under the rising whale. Dive bombers plummet almost vertically, their noses pointed straight down, like steel arrows thrown by God. The shriek of their dive sirens, the infamous Jericho trumpets, slices the air into ribbons of terror. Lieutenant Sato, still in his flight harness beside his idle Zero, watches one Dauntless descend directly overhead. It is so close he can see the guns, the chipped paint, even the face of the American pilot, a momentary ghost framed in glass. Sato's brain cannot reconcile what he sees. Aircraft aren't supposed to fall like that. They aren't supposed to aim straight down at ships. They aren't supposed to use gravity like a weapon. Japanese naval doctrine had been built on assumptions that fighters would intercept attackers long before they reached the carriers, that coordinated torpedo attacks were the primary threat to capital ships, that dive bombers, slow and clumsy, could never get through. But nothing in those assumptions accounts for what is happening now. Nothing accounts for the sky becoming a corridor of death. Aboard the destroyer Arashi, the very vessel whose earlier maneuvers inadvertently guided McCluskey's squadrons straight to the Japanese fleet, the crew watches the Dauntlesses break formation and peel downward. Bakayaro. No fighter cover, a gunner roars as he swings a Type 96 25mm cannon upward, but the angle is too steep. The attackers are dropping nearly vertical. The gunners try anyway, firing blindly, the barrels shaking, hot casings tumbling across the deck like brass rain. The Dauntlesses keep coming. At 15,000 feet, the airframe hum deepens. At 10,000 feet, the ocean below becomes a spinning plate of blue and steel. At 5,000 feet, the bomb release toggles click under gloved hands. McCluskey's voice is calm in the storm. Steady, steady. The carriers grow enormous beneath them. Soryu's red sun insignia fills the cockpit window. Now, the first bombs release. Great black shapes drop away, tumbling end over end, disappearing into the slipstream before anyone on the Japanese decks even realizes they've fallen. As each Dauntless pulls out, its pilot fighting a blackout-inducing surge of G-force, they streak low across the waves, leaving destruction in their wake. Behind them, the bombs are still falling, still gathering the unstoppable logic of mass multiplied by acceleration. In the final second before impact, there is silence. Then the world erupts. A white flash, too bright to process, swallows the forward flight deck. Then comes the sound. A concussion so deep it rattles bone, a punch of air that slams men to their knees. A column of fire erupts upward, carrying with it pieces of steel, planks, and human voices torn into fragments. The blast rolls outward in a ring, flattening parked aircraft like toys swept from a table. Below decks, the shockwave hurls fuel lines from their sockets. Avgas sprays like liquid lightning. When it finds flame, the air itself combusts, a tunnel of fire racing through maintenance bays, swallowing 30 men before they can stand. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Sato rises from the planks, ears ringing. Smoke curls around him, thick and acrid, tasting of burning rubber and scorched flesh. A Zero beside him lies snapped at the fuselage, its wings folded like a broken bird. He tries to speak, but coughs instead, lungs filling with soot. And then he sees the second Dauntless bomb strike. It plunges directly into the aft elevator, a perfect, brutal geometry. The elevator platform vaporizes, sending the blast downward into the hangar where armed aircraft wait with bellies full of fuel and bombs. The resulting detonation is not a single explosion, but a chain reaction. A rolling thunderstorm of fire, each shockwave feeding the next. Soryu shudders, lists, groans. Men slide across the tilting deck as fire whips across the surface in serpentine plumes. Officers shout to seal bulkheads, but it is already too late. The fires are not discrete blazes. They are alive, roaring, devouring creatures tearing through the ship's lungs. Aboard Akagi, the bridge crew watches the disaster unfold on their sister ship. Admiral Nagumo grips the railing, knuckles white. His staff officers shout bearings, range, damage estimates, but the numbers mean nothing. Reality is burning right in front of them. And then the Dauntlesses turn toward Akagi. "Hard to port," the navigator cries, but the carrier is already committed to a slow curve. Its deck is cluttered with refueling aircraft, B-5N torpedo bombers stacked wing to wing, each one a bomb waiting for ignition. Above them, Lieutenant Richard Best, callsign Dick, rolls into his dive. His Dauntless shudders as it tips forward, the wind howling over the perforated dive brakes. Frank Murray, his rear gunner, braces himself, eyes watering in the slipstream. "Target Akagi's midships," Best yells into the throat mic. The carrier grows from a speck into a sprawling city of steel. He can see figures running on deck. He can see the rising smoke from Soryu drifting across the ocean like a shroud. He can also see, with cold, professional clarity, that Akagi's deck is crammed with fueled, armed aircraft. It is the perfect target. He corrects for wind, angles the nose, and ignores the tracers whipping past the cockpit. Hold! At 1,500 feet, he releases his bomb. It drops clean. Best yanks the control stick back, and the Dauntless screams as it pulls out of the dive, gravity clawing at his vision. Below him, the bomb strikes. A thin puff, almost gentle, marks the initial impact. Then the carrier erupts. The blast tears open the flight deck like paper. Fire surges into the hangar where bombs and torpedoes lie exposed. One after another, they ignite, each shockwave blooming into a mushroom of flame. Men are flung overboard, aircraft cartwheel into the sky, trailing sheets of burning fabric. The Akagi groans low in its throat, the sound of a Titan being wounded. Nagumo's bridge windows rattle as heat washes over them. The Admiral's face does not move, but inside him something breaks. This cannot be happening. These slow American dive bombers, these Dauntlesses that Japanese pilots had dismissed, are tearing apart the heart of the carrier striking force in minutes. On Kaga, Petty Officer Morita barely has time to stand before the bombs reach them too. 3 Dauntlesses break from formation, diving like hawks toward prey. Their sirens scream. Tracers rise to meet them, but the angles are hopeless, nearly vertical. One gun crew fires until the barrel glows red, shouting curses drowned by the shriek of wind. The first bomb hits near the forward elevator, punching through the wooden deck as though through wet rice paper. A geyser of flame erupts, taking with it 30 men and 2 fueled aircraft. The second bomb lands aft, detonating among a cluster of torpedo bombers loaded with Type 91 torpedoes. The explosion that follows is indescribable. It lifts the stern of Kaga out of the water, tilting the entire carrier in a grotesque arc. Morita feels himself thrown sideways. When he looks up, he sees fire everywhere. Rolling across the deck in oily waves, licking at the island structure, turning steel orange. He tries to get his bearings. All he sees are flames. All he hears are screams. Kaga burns from bow to stern in the span of 3 minutes. As the Dauntlesses climb away, the 3 Japanese carriers are burning, pillars of black smoke rising into the hard blue sky like funeral pyres for an entire doctrine. The idea that aircraft posed no existential threat to carriers, that fighters alone could safeguard the fleet, dies here in fire and steel. But the day is not done. 1 carrier remains, and the American dive bomber squadrons aren't finished. The smoke columns of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu rise like black pillars into the midday sky, visible for miles. But beyond those burning giants, steaming, listing, mortally wounded, 1 carrier remains intact, still carving a white wake through the cobalt sea. Here you, the flying dragon. Aboard her, the atmosphere is electric, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and burning resolve. Where the other carriers were caught mid-refuel, decks cluttered and vulnerable, Hiryu had just completed a sortie cycle. Her flight deck is clear. Her elevators are operational. Her air crews, stunned and pale, now rush with a frantic precision that makes the ship feel alive. There is no time to mourn the three sister ships. No time to reckon with doctrine shattered in minutes. Hiryu is the last sword in the scabbard, and she intends to strike. Up in the ready room, Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, commander of the torpedo bomber squadron, already wounded from the morning's earlier raid, listens as runners deliver updates from the bridge. Akagi, aflame. Kaga, hit multiple times. Soryu, aviation fuel fires throughout the hangars. Tominaga's hand tightens on the arm of his seat. His crew watches him closely. He is respected. Quiet, methodical, unmatched in torpedo attack discipline. And now the weight of the battle has shifted onto him. He stands. "We are not finished," he says, voice steady despite the tremor in his legs. "Prepare for launch. We will strike back." A murmur ripples across the room. Not hesitation, but something like devotion. The men know their odds. They have seen the sky split open by Dauntlesses, seen the burning hulks of their fleet. But they also believe in their training, in their aircraft, in Tominaga's resolve. Below, mechanics roll out a fresh wave of B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. Armorers sling the long, sleek Type 91 torpedoes into position under the fuselages. The smell of fuel is sharp, almost aggressive. On the catwalk, a petty officer wipes sweat from his brow, muttering, "For Akagi, for Nagumo, for Japan." The deck crew moves with renewed purpose. At 10:45 a.m., Hiryu turns into the wind. The ocean seems to hush. Tominaga's engine roars to life, vibrating the very air. His radio man gives a thumbs up. The deck officer sweeps his signal flags downward. The first Kate launches, then the second. Then the entire squadron rises into the sun, wings gleaming as if cast from polished bone. They climb in tight formation, aiming toward the last known position of the American carriers. Behind them, the flight deck crews prepare the next wave, dive bombers, ready to strike again if opportunity allows. But there is a strange hollow feeling in the air. Hiryu is not launching into certainty. Hiryu is launching into the unknown, into enemies she cannot see, toward carriers whose locations must be deduced like ghosts from scattered sightings and smoke trails. For the first time in the battle, the Japanese air crews feel what the Americans felt days earlier, that the enemy might appear suddenly, decisively, from nowhere. Far ahead of them, the American carriers, Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, cut across the waves in a defensive weave. Radio operators aboard Yorktown are still transmitting frantic messages. Multiple hits observed, 3 enemy carriers burning. More aircraft incoming. Prepare for attack. Torpedo lookouts scan the sky until their eyes ache. Yorktown's combat air patrol scrambles to intercept. The rising tension feels like static crawling through the steel ribs of the ship. Then they see them, a black dot, then 3. Then a full wedge of Kate torpedo bombers flying in low, only a few dozen feet above the waves. Yorktown's klaxon screams, "All hands air attack incoming." Gunners rush to their stations. Ammunition runners slide crates across the deck. The ship pivots hard to starboard, white spray knifing out from the bow as she tries to complicate the torpedo run. The Japanese formation tightens. Tominaga dives low, skimming the wave tops. Tracer fire reaches up toward them like orange vines bending in the slipstream. A Kate to Tominaga's right bursts into flame, spiraling into the ocean in a plume of steam, but the survivors hold their line discipline forged in years of training overriding human fear. Tominaga whispers something, a prayer perhaps. At 800 meters, he commits. He drops his torpedo. It tumbles clean, slicing into the sea, the parachute drag system stabilizing its entry. Yorktown veers again, desperate to evade, but the Type 91 is designed for this, adjusting toward its target with brutal efficiency. Then, impact. The torpedo slams into Yorktown amidships, water erupting upward in a violent plume. The carrier convulses. Compartments flood instantly, bulkheads groan. Men are knocked off their feet as alarms wail across every deck. Tominaga pulls upward, engine screaming, but another burst of flak finds him. His aircraft ignites, trailing a long tail of black smoke as it arcs away from Yorktown. The crew on the American carrier watches the burning Kate climb, falter, and descend. Tominaga does not bail out. His plane hits the water and disappears. Back aboard Hiryu, word of the hit spreads like fire. Yorktown crippled. The Americans are damaged. Hiryu has avenged the fleet. For a moment, one brief, flickering heartbeat hope returns. But out on the horizon, hidden in the high blue, the Dauntlesses are forming up again. And Hiryu's moment is about to end. June 4th, 1942, early afternoon. Hiryu is the last survivor of Japan's carrier strike force. A lone giant carving white arcs through a sea littered with oil slicks, burning wreckage and drifting lifeboats. Her funnels pump black smoke into the sky as she increases speed, zigzagging to avoid the American shadow she knows is coming. On the flight deck, air crews brace for their next strike wave. The dive bombers of her own D-3A Val squadron, armed and fueled, ready to launch. Planes are spotted at the forward end of the deck. The salt wind cuts across the carrier, hot with chemical tang. Cordite, gasoline, scorched paint drifting from the ruins of the fleet. But in the midst of this urgency, a young signal officer on the bridge senses something wrong. He lifts binoculars, searching the sunlit sky. At first he sees nothing. Then the glint of glass, then many glints, then shapes. Dark specks descending from the high blue like seeds cast from an invisible hand. His breath catches. Tateki Kogeki. Dive bombers, American dive bombers. The words stab through the bridge. Every head snaps up. But it's too late. The Dauntlesses have returned. High above, Lieutenant Earl Gallagher leads one arm of Enterprise's dive bomber group. To their right, Lieutenant Commander Richard Best leads the other. They fly in disciplined silence, cutting through thin, ice-shard air at 20,000 feet. Below them, Hiryu's pale flight deck stands out against the scarf of blue ocean, the lone surviving heart of the Japanese strike force. Best's radio man, Frank Murray, scans behind them, shouting through the wind, "No fighters! No fighters climbing!" They've caught Hiryu naked in the sky. Best nods, jaw tightening. And this is our turn. The SBDs roll in. Dive brakes snap open. Those iconic perforated red flaps that, by now, every Japanese sailor recognizes with dread. The sound of the dive begins as a low hum, then builds into a monstrous shriek as the Dauntlesses tip forward. The world rotates. The ocean turns vertical. Gravity takes command. On Hiryu's deck, chaos erupts instantly. Clear the planes. Get them below. No time. Take cover. Crewmen abandon fueling hoses and bomb hoists, sprinting for the edges of the deck. Pilots who only minutes earlier were climbing into cockpits now dive beneath parked aircraft or fling themselves into stairwells. A mechanic trips and falls. A petty officer clamps a hand around his harness and drags him upright. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. The 25mm cannons chatter wildly, tracers arcing upward like angry fireflies. The guns are firing too fast, overheating, shaking men's teeth with every burst. But their angles are wrong. The Dauntlesses are descending almost perfectly vertical. One gun crew on the starboard side screams as a near miss showers them with shrapnel. Another gun jams, steam hissing from the broken breech. Officers shout conflicting orders, drowned by the rising roar from above. The Dauntlesses are coming down like falling cliffs. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher takes the first run. His Dauntless trembles violently as he locks onto the center of the flight deck. The carrier grows massive beneath him, angles sharpening, lines resolving into rails, planks, human figures scattering like ants. He holds steady. Wind shrieks through the dive brakes. At 2,000 feet, he releases. The bomb drops clean from the rack, and Gallagher's plane whips upward in a crushing pullout, the ocean spinning sideways. His vision tunnels, black spots flicker at the edges. Murray swears behind him. Below, impact. The bomb punches into the forward elevator in a burst of fire and steel. Flames burst upward in a pillar, swallowing the deck crew, ripping open the hangar below. Next comes Best. He selects a tighter target, the very aft section where fueled aircraft are warming for launch, the most vulnerable place on a carrier. Through the canopy, he watches the deck rush up at impossible speed. The carrier is filling his entire world. His gloved finger squeezes the release. The bomb tumbles away. He pulls up so hard his ribs feel like they might crack. Down below, the bomb smashes through the deck, detonating among armed valves waiting below. The explosions chain instantly, 1, then 5, then a dozen, each warhead igniting the one beside it. A boiling blossom of orange erupts from the flight deck, billowing outward in a rolling wave. The aft third of Hiryu disappears in flame. A third bomb strikes near the island. Shattered glass rains across the bridge. Officers duck. One is thrown across the compartment. Flames lick up the signal mast. The helmsman grips the wheel as the carrier lurches violently, machinery screaming beneath the deck. Within minutes, Hiryu is engulfed. Fuel lines rupture. Planes detonate. The hangar becomes a horizontal volcano, spitting metal and oil. The fire jumps bulkheads as if alive. The ship slows, then lists. The last carrier of the First Air Fleet, the pride of the Imperial Navy, the final sword in Nagumo's hand is dying. From above, as the Dauntlesses circle, the smoke rises thick and oily. The pilots watch the flames with grim silence. They aren't exultant. They know what they've done. They know how many men are burning below. But they also know what was at stake. The Japanese strike force, the same one that attacked Pearl Harbor, is gone. Destroyed in 5 minutes of diving fury. The battle is not yet over, but its outcome is already sealed. The era of the carrier is affirmed. And the myth that Japanese naval crews had nothing to fear from aircraft has died in the furnace of Midway. Late afternoon, June 4th, 1942. Hiryu is burning alive. The ship lists hard to starboard, its once proud flight deck slanted like a wounded wing. Smoke gushes from every seam, boiling upward into the bruised sky. Below deck, steel frames glow red as if from a furnace. Bulkheads groan, twist, and finally surrender with metallic screams. The fire has eaten through 3 decks and is starving for oxygen. It finds it whenever a door opens, exploding into sudden violent blossoms. On the bridge, Captain Tomeo Kaku stands with arms behind his back, drenched in sweat and soot. His uniform is blackened, his cap gone, his face streaked with ash, but his stance is rigid. The bridge windows crack from heat as he surveys the dying ship. An officer bursts in, a voice raw. "Captain, the fires are uncontrollable. We've lost pumps in the forward compartments. Aviation gas tanks are in danger." Another explosion rocks the ship, cutting him off. The deck pitches violently. Both men grab the rail. Captain Kaku steadies himself. His voice remains calm. They prepare to abandon ship. For a moment, silence, disbelief hangs in the air. Then the order spreads like electricity. Down on the hangar deck, what's left of it. A petty officer leads two burned mechanics through clouds of black smoke. One man's hair is completely singed. Another's uniform is half melted into his skin. The petty officer coughs into a rag as he pushes open a scorched hatch. Move, abandon ship." Men stumble toward the open decks, guided by the intermittent daylight slicing through smoke. Every step is blind instinct. The air tastes of copper and fuel. The heat is unbearable, a living thing pressing against their skin. On the flight deck, a ship's carpenter kneels beside a boy no older than 17 whose leg is trapped beneath a collapsed support beam. The carpenter strains, muscles trembling as he tries to lift it. The boy grips his sleeve. "Leave me," the boy gasps. "You must leave me." The carpenter ignores him, teeth gritted, face slick with sweat. He lifts. The beam moves, inches, then falls back as the deck groans underfoot. Flames spider across the planks. The carpenter tries again, screaming with effort. A pair of sailors rush over. Together they heave. The beam shifts. The boy is pulled free. "Go!" one sailor shouts, pushing them toward the rail. Moments later, the flames engulf the spot where they had crouched. The destroyers, Makigumo and Kazagumo, move in alongside Hiryu, their hulls slicing through slicks of burning oil. Their crews throw down lines and nets as men begin diving into the sea. The water stings like acid from the spread of aviation fuel. Flames lick the surface in places, bright orange patches that drift and flare. Sailors swim hard to escape the heat, coughing violently as they hit colder layers below. A radio man clings to a floating timber, staring back at the ship that had been his steel world for 2 years. The flight deck looks unreal, curved and broken, flames reaching skyward like claws. He whispers a small apology, to the ship, to his friends, to no one. Another explosion. Hiryu jolts, a shudder running through her spine. Men in the water stop swimming and stare. The island structure tilts further. Back on the bridge, Captain Kaku is the last to leave. He stands amid shattered equipment and falling embers. His damage control officer begs him to go, voice trembling. "Captain, please. The destroyers are alongside. We must leave." Kaku looks out at the horizon where, hours earlier, his fleet had stood invincible. Smoke now marks every point of that compass. He nods once, solemnly. Very well. He takes one final look at the broken ship beneath him and steps through the ruined hatch, descending toward the ladder nets. In the water, hundreds of sailors tread, cling, cough. Makigumo's crew pulls them aboard as fast as they can, hands grabbing at slick, soot-covered uniforms. One rescued sailor asks, voice cracking, Where are the others? Akagi, Kaga, Soryu?" The destroyer officer shakes his head. His silence is the answer. A moment later, all eyes turn as Hiryu's hull groans again. A long, low, mournful sound that seems to come from the earth itself. The list deepens. Flames bloom brighter. Smoke pours from the stern. Hiryu is dying with dignity, but dying all the same. The sun begins to sink, staining the ocean gold and blood red. And as the last light glints off her warped steel, the flying dragon slips lower into the sea. Men tread water, watching, some saluting, some weeping, some expressionless. The destroyers sound their horns in a long, sorrowful note as the carrier's bow dips beneath the waves. The fire hisses out. The sea closes over her deck, and the last surviving carrier of Nagumo's strike force sinks beneath the Pacific. The war will continue, but this moment, this slow descent, marks the final exhalation of Japan's once unquestioned naval supremacy. And every man who survives knows exactly what force struck the fatal blow. The American dive bomber, the Dauntless. June 5th, 1942, dawn. The Pacific is quiet. Smoke still snakes upward from the distant wrecks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Faint black smudges against a morning sky washed pale by the rising sun. The sea is unnaturally calm, littered with drifting rafts, charred planks, and dark patches of oil that shimmer like bruises. Hiryu is gone. The last survivor of the carrier striking force lies on the ocean floor, settling into eternal silence. On the decks of the American carriers Enterprise and Hornet, sailors gather along the rails, staring at the horizon. Some speak in murmurs, others stand with arms folded, absorbing what the previous day has wrought. The smell of cordite lingers in the air. A few Dauntlesses sit on the deck, their wings scorched, fabric torn, fuselages peppered with shrapnel. Their crews move with exhausted precision, eyes hollow, bodies running on habit and adrenaline. From Enterprise's forward elevator, Lieutenant Commander Clarence McCluskey steps into the morning light. His face is drawn, streaked from windburn and engine oil, but his eyes have a sharp, haunted clarity. He knows they have won, but he also knows the price paid, the knife edge on which victory balanced. A deckhand passes him and mutters, "Sir, did we really sink all 4? McCluskey nods. There is no triumph in the gesture, only understanding. In the ready room, pilots sit slumped in their chairs, flight suits still half-zipped, dog tags dangling against their chests. Some clutch tin cups of coffee with trembling hands. Others stare at the chalkboard where yesterday's sortie roster remains untouched, names scrawled beside aircraft numbers. Lieutenant Richard Best sits alone, notebook open, pencil unmoving. He had scored one of the fatal hits on Akagi. His bomb had turned the battle, but he looks less like a hero than a man who has seen the curtain pulled back on war's terrible arithmetic. Murray, his radio man, sits beside him, whispering, "We did what we had to, Dick." Best nods. "I know, but that doesn't make it easier." A silence fills the room. A silence the Navy will never record, one that textbooks cannot capture. The silence of men who have watched thousands die by their hands. Out at sea, the Japanese survivors aboard destroyers Makigumo and Kazagumo sit wrapped in blankets, shivering despite the warm air. Medics move among them, cleaning burns, bandaging shrapnel wounds, passing out canteens of water. One young seaman stares at his trembling hands. He had worked on Hiryu's flight deck, refueling planes, tightening bolts beneath the roar of engines. Hours earlier, he'd believed Japanese naval aviation could not be challenged, that the carrier was invincible, that aircraft could be stopped by fighters, by gunnery, by doctrine. But then he looked up and saw the Dauntlesses falling, straight down, like silent executioners. He whispers to no one, "How? How could they do that? Die from the sky like stones, and hit so true?" An elderly petty officer beside him answers softly, "It wasn't the planes." The boy looks up. It was the men flying them. Aboard the Japanese cruiser Nagara, the highest-ranking survivors of the First Air Fleet gather in a makeshift wardroom. The mood is stunned, hollow, like men walking among ruins they cannot yet comprehend. Reports lie scattered across the table. 4 carriers lost. Air groups annihilated. The American dive bomber proved decisive. A commander runs a hand over his face, voice cracking. "All our doctrine, our training, our confidence, undone by one type of aircraft." Another officer shakes his head. "Not undone. Revealed. We underestimated the threat from above." He taps a report. "They used gravity as a weapon, precision as a weapon. They fell from the sky faster than we could react." Silence follows. Harsh, heavy, irrevocable. On Enterprise, the Dauntless crews begin cleaning their aircraft. They run hands over patched metal, chipped paint, bullet holes. Some speak to their planes in quiet tones, not out of superstition, but gratitude. These were not fast aircraft, not elegant, not sleek predators like the Zero, but they were durable, stable, built for accuracy, built for the vertical plunge that turned the battle. Above them, 2 deckhands watch a Dauntless with a new patch of paint on its nose. One says, "Crazy to think. Before yesterday, the brass thought dive bombers were just support aircraft." The other laughs once, a tired laugh. "Hell, the Japanese thought they didn't need to fear aircraft at all. Now look." They watch the morning sun glint off the Dauntless canopy. The plane doesn't gleam like a hero's steed. It sits quiet, humble, patient, like a tool that knows it changed history. The battle maps will soon be redrawn, new doctrines written, new ships built. But for the men who lived through June 4th, 1942, one truth is etched into their memory deeper than any report or textbook. Carriers rule the sea, but aircraft rule the carriers. And no aircraft demonstrated that more clearly than the SBD Dauntless. The squat, unassuming dive bomber that fell from the sky and turned the tide of the Pacific War.